In this lesson, we're going to explore the shading attributes. Now, these are built-in attributes that are already wired up inside of the Maya Fluid system. All right, so what I'm going to do is create pretty much a basic default. You notice that I keep doing this, and it's really so as you're creating these, you're able to follow along and not have to have a lot of project files to manage. So I just hit 6. Let's play this back. Okay, great. So again, we're looking at density, okay? So we're going to scroll down our area here. We're going to come down to shading. And the first few that we're going to talk about are transparency and glow. So transparency is the overall container's transparency. So if I set this to 0 transparency, we don't have any for the container. If I set it all the way up, the whole container is invisible. So it's affecting the entire block here. Now the glow intensity, we'll come back and talk about this because it's really hard to see the glow intensity without changing some of these other options. All right, so basically we have color and incandescence as the two main drivers that we can have here. Right now what we're saying is choose a color of white, okay, and then color this constant. Well, if you remember, let me just change this content methods from dynamic to gradient, okay? When we did this, we also ended up with a constant gradient, which pretty much meant make the whole thing solid white. Well, let's change this from a solid constant to a Y gradient. And now let's go down to the color here and take a look at this. So my color is set to white. Okay, and if I change this to any other color, you notice that it's represented here in this area. So just to keep things separate, I'll make this blue, and then I'll add a color, and we'll make this, we'll just make it starkly different. So it's very different there. Okay, so you notice that I don't really see my gradient. I just see a color. Now, if I change this to gradient, all of a sudden, that color now is replaced with this ramp in a Y gradient. I can use a X gradient, Z gradient. I can center it out, whatever I want to do, right? But all this time, we've been working with constant. Well, let's take this back to our dynamic grid. Okay, so let me change this from gradient back to dynamic grid. And instead of constant, which is essentially filling the whole thing with one color, let's change this to density. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to see wherever it's very dense, we can actually have this color be represented. Wherever it's thinner, we have the outer color. Okay, let's go ahead and render this. All right, that's what we get. Now, that's completely different than the incandescence, okay? Because incandescence, it's going to essentially give the illusion of emitting light even though there is no light source. So I'm going to set my density back here to constant, and I'm just going to set it to black. Black, so whatever my incandescence is will come right through. Now, my default setting for incandescence is temperature. Let's change this to density. Okay, let's rewind this and play this. All right, and let's render this. Okay, very cool. So just for a demonstration purposes, I'm going to go back up to my content details and increase my density to 1. Okay, now we're going to have a bunch more content in here. There we go. And again, I can shift these however I want. So if I want to move that yellow in, I can easily do that. Just like that. Okay, and we'll render that. And you'll notice that by rendering this, it's much brighter. Okay, it's connected to incandescence. It's going to look like this in the dark. It'll look like this in the bright light. So it's very nice. But now I can actually crank up my glow. So if I set this to a high value and hit render, you'll notice that the glow will be a post effect that will then add on top of what was rendered. And what's nice about glow is it will actually extend beyond the boundary. So it's kind of a cool if you had to make a glowing flame or lava or some type of effect like that, this would be a really easy way to do that. Okay, that's the glow intensity. Now, there is a great drop-off feature, and later I'm going to show you how to create your own drop-offs. Right now it's a cube, which is giving me this soft edge up here. If I set this to off, you'll notice that it goes all the way out to the edge. Okay, we can set this to something like a sphere, and then we also have the ability to choke this in and out. So if we wanted to just have it appear in a circle, why, we could create just that if we wanted to. Okay, so again, that's this drop-off shape. I'm going to set it to none for now. All right, all of these you'll notice has an input bias, and what this will allow us to do is shift this ramp up and down the gradient that we're using. Okay, you have an opacity ramp or an opacity ramp widget. Here you'll be able to set your own graph. So this is a value of 1, okay, and I can make the ends disappear and the areas that are not opaque show up. So you can see here I'm eating away. Right here you can kind of see that. So now if we look at this ramp right above, the areas that were black and orange are showing through, but the areas where we have yellow are gone, and it matches this ramp. Okay, if we want to have the reverse, we just shift it down to where maybe just the yellow parts are visible. Okay, so that's our ramp, and currently it's connected to density. And again, you can shift this as well. So if we were to do something like this and increase our glow, we get a nice effect like this. All right. I'm going to remove my glow because here in a second when I show you these mats, I want to make that really clear of what's happening. All right, so let me add some opacity here just like this. And let's take a look at our mats. Now, by default, you're using the opacity gain. So essentially what the mat is going to do is your alpha channel. It's going to look at this image, look at the opacity, and or look at the areas that are transparent and say, okay, that's what my mat will be. So let's go ahead and render this. Okay, we see what this looks like. We're going to look at the alpha channel, and that is the alpha channel. Now, let me just scale this down a little bit here. If, however, I go to this matte opacity and I lower this down, you'll notice that as I re-render the section here, I have a darker matte. Now, here's my color. Color hasn't changed. It's just my alpha channel. Okay, so that's my opacity gain. I can increase it or decrease. It's all based on this opacity that you see here. Okay. Now, if I want just a solid matte, which essentially is just going to take this shape and say, all right, let's render this. Give me just the overall shape of where the fluid is, and I'll use that as a cutout. We can do that too. Now, black hole is very interesting, okay, because black hole essentially will take anything that the fluid is being rendered at and give it nothing. So if you have an object behind here, it will actually cut out the object. So let's just create that real quick. Let me just go in here and create a polygon sphere. I'll move it back behind this object like this. And let's re-render. And again, we're only looking at the alpha channel here. Okay. And let's just double check our settings. Let me just move this like this. There we go. So you can see by setting that to black hole, wherever my particle system was, it's essentially going to create a cutout, so that way if I have objects that are going through it or in between it or behind it, they will comp correctly. Okay. Again, these are available to you. You may want to just leave it at alpha gain or opacity gain, which most people can get away with. But again, if you have to have some tweaking ability, you've got it right there.